Welcome to Reading Made Easy. My name is Gerald Hughes. I'm Director of the Neurolinguistic Learning Center here in California. For the past 6 years, we've been helping children, teens, and adults overcome the effects of a variety of learning challenges, including dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and I want to congratulate you on selecting our Reading Made Easy program. The goal of this program is to provide the student with a series of simple recipes and techniques to make learning to read easier, faster, and more fun. Specifically, we're going to cover briefly the 4 learning styles. Just take a look at how different people learn. We're going to look at the difference primarily between the visual and auditory learning strategies and styles. We're going to break down the 6 components of reading. We're going to provide some exercises for reducing stress and increasing focus and improving memorization. We are going to seriously look at the secret and the power of visual reading. This is not something new. It's been around for a long time, but we're going to apply it here in a way that should be helpful to a lot of students. And finally, how to take effective reading notes. So briefly, that's what we're going to cover in this program. I should mention this program is not intended to correct the deficiencies or the struggles that may be the result of dyslexia, ADHD, autism, or other specific learning challenges. This is a much shorter program designed to get a student up and running fairly quickly, and our Reading with Dyslexia program is necessarily more, it's longer, more complex, and necessarily includes some additional techniques and exercises that probably most folks don't need just to improve their reading or make reading easier, faster, and let's hope a bit more fun. So to begin with, we're going to look at some of the common struggles of reading. And it's kind of the first and the last thing on the list is focus and attention. If you're drifting off, if you're struggling with keeping your mind focused on what you're reading, it's going to be very, very difficult to retain that information. So paying attention, focus and attention is critical to the reading process. Lack of organization, reading in most cases is going to be delivering a lot of information, and it's important to organize that information. Our minds really don't like information just floating around kind of willy-nilly, just random. We really need to have that information organized and meaningful to retain it and utilize it. Some folks, for whatever reason, seem to have difficulty processing auditory information. They may or may not be diagnosed with a disorder such as dyslexia or auditory processing disorder, but certain learning styles tend to be more visual in the way they process information and in the way they relate to the world in general. For some folks, reading, writing, and spelling may kind of all come together. If someone's struggling with reading, writing, and spelling, I would definitely suspect dyslexia or some other issue, and I doubt that person is going to respond well to a phonics-based program. Memorization of spelling and vocabulary words, math facts, etc. requires sustained focus and attention. In fact, a significant number of children who get labeled or diagnosed as having poor comprehension are actually suffering from or struggling with poor retention. But the current testing methods generally, the simple ones that you would get in a school setting, generally don't distinguish between the two. So a student could have perfect comprehension, yet they're being treated, or their remediation for their struggle is going to be a remediation that's appropriate to a student that has poor comprehension. And this is going to be very frustrating, when in fact the problem is retention rather than comprehension, or poor retention rather than poor comprehension, and the remediation is designed for poor comprehension. There's a good chance it's going to be frustrating to everyone, not just the student, but student and teacher alike. So those are the common reading struggles. Next, we're going to look at learning style, personality and learning style, because this is going to give you some insight into your way of learning or your child's way of learning. And in our model, we've come up with 4 basic learning styles or personality styles. If you're familiar with Myers-Briggs or the classic Greek temperaments, you may notice some familiarity here. And just for fun, I've actually included the characters of Winnie the Pooh as kind of an archetype, if you will, to these personality or learning styles. And what's different about our approach here is we're looking at learning and personality in terms of how you process information. That is the key, or it seems to be the key, in resolving some of these learning challenges. So very quickly, let's look at the 4 basic temperaments, or the 4 basic personality or learning styles. And the first 2 we're going to look at are Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore. Now, you can tell they're very, very different kind of personalities, but they have a lot of things in common. They're both very auditory in the way they process information. While Eeyore is definitely more kinesthetic and associated into his feelings, Winnie the Pooh is kind of a more matter of fact. He's kind of stepping back and seeing the world from this kind of neutral, kind of a third-party perspective. He's in it, but not sucked into it. These 2 personality styles tend to do very well in our public school, typical classroom setting. They are very auditory in the way they process information, very linear. They relate well to the pieces and the features of how information is presented in books and in conversation, which is conversation itself is a very linear process. And they really do tend to do well in that setting. Now, we have some other folks, our choleric, Mr. Rabbit, and sanguine, Tigger. These are going to be more visual, spatial in the way they process information. The rabbit, he's a little bit more standoffish, a little more dissociated, kind of like Pooh. He kind of wants to be in charge. These are folks that generally make good leaders, as opposed to your Tigger, your sanguine, who he wants to join the group. He doesn't want to lead the group. He wants to be a part of the group, and just he wants to go along for the ride and enjoy it. Again, both of these learning styles are going to be very visual in the way they process information. They tend to be external, a little bit more external in the way they process information. Of course, Tigger is going to be the most extroverted, with Winnie the Pooh and maybe with the rabbit being more introverted. Very dynamic in the way they process information, which is great for puzzle solving and problem solving, but not so good when you're wanting to process information in a linear fashion, very from point to point, A, B, C, D. So they can be very intelligent, either one of these learning styles, but still they may struggle with certain aspects of classroom learning.